How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
Eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital.
That's difficult to answer.
this the end? There's a noise inside my head of crying people facing death. Is this the end? Is this the end? Oh, I'm burning in the dystopia. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the dystopia. This is the final genocide. What have we done to the world? What have we done to the world? I'm burning in dystopia. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in dystopia. This is the final
Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to the cult. We listen, we had our dessert yesterday, didn't we? We spent over 6 hours yesterday watching every single episode that Candace Owens did about Brigitte Macron being a man, allegedly. And that was a lot. That was a lot. That was a good little break of a day. And now we're going to read hardcore queer dystopian literature. Is everyone excited to do hardcore queer dystopian literature? I know I'm excited to do hardcore queer dystopian literature because we are continuing today, guys, with the Counter Revolutionary Book Club. Now, if you've never been to Counter Revolutionary Book Club, it might be a little confusing today, because we are continuing a book that we've already actually started, but that's okay. If you're new, we will bring you up to speed. You're right. You know what? I actually do have one of those things. My husband bought me one, and I just never set it up. So I do need a soundboard. You're right about that. You're right. So, if you have never been, no, we're not doing the rope thing right now. We're not doing the rope thing today. We are going to do the rope thing. I promise we're going to do the rope thing. I cross my heart and hope to die. We're going to do the rope thing. We're just not going to do it today. Today, we're doing Counter Revolutionary Book Club, okay? So, if you've never done Counter Revolutionary Book Club with us, it might be a little confusing for you, but that's okay. We can bring you up to speed. So what you need to do if you are new to this is you need to head over to my main Substack. That is Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. When you get there, I need you to look for the book club link at the top of the website. Click on that link, and you are going to be brought to a page where you can find previous episodes of the Counter Revolutionary Book Club. This is a podcast. It's available on Apple. It's also available on Spotify. You can also listen to it through the Substack app. And so that's one of the resources there. Thank you, Newer too. Candace is currently airing a Brigitte epilogue. Well, we're not going to watch that. And guys, just so everyone's aware, when we're doing Counter Revolutionary Book Club, I am asking people, please keep the chat relevant to what we're talking about. And the reason I ask that is in Counter Revolutionary Book Club, we are analyzing some really complex far left queer dystopian documents. These are complex. It's confusing for a lot of people. The language is not simple to understand. And so when we have chats going on that are not relevant to what we're doing, it is distracting for me. It's also distracting for other people in the chat because I'm watching the chat to try to see if there are questions that need to be answered, where people are confused, things like that. So on Counter-Revolutionary Book Club Day, we really need to rein it in. And if you don't like it, hey, guess what? You don't have to be here. Come back tomorrow. We'll be doing something else. But I'm asking everyone to cooperate. And if you don't, it's probably going to go worse for you than it is for me. I'll tell you that right now. So on the in the podcast, you can find the previous episodes. Now we are working on a document called Against the Gender Nightmare. We have done 2 previous episodes already. We are about halfway through this document. It is a very long document, so we've been breaking it up into sections. So if you want to get caught up, probably best to listen to those 2 episodes before. But if you're new and you want to hang out and find out what it is, that's okay. Just make sure you're asking questions in the chat as we're going through this because that way we're going to be able to help get you up to speed. Now, as I'm explaining the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club, do you guys in the chat want to tell me what you remember so far from Against the Gender Nightmare? For those of you who have done part 1 and 2 with me, let me know in the chat what you remember so far about Against the Gender Nightmare. Now, if you're looking for this document, underneath the book club page on the Substack, you're going to find a page called The Dystopian Documents Queer and Gender Activists Are Reading. I need you to click on that document. I need you to scroll down, and this will provide you with links and PDFs for everything we're reading in the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club. We've already read Towards the Queerest Insurrection by the Mary Nardini Gang. We've already read Polyamory and Queer Anarchism, Infinite Possibilities for Resistance by Susan Song. Now we're working on Against the Gender Nightmare. You can download a PDF of it. You can also go to the Anarchist Library and read it there. We're going to try reading it out of the Anarchist Library today. We're going to see how this goes. This didn't work out so well last time, but that's okay because I do have a backup in case this doesn't work out so well for us because, we always like to have backups of every single thing that we do to make sure that everything goes in the way that we need it to go. All right, let me see. I just want to move this up here. There we go. There we go. That's better. That's better. That's better. Okay. So what do you guys remember so far about the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club? Let me know in the chat. Bot says they hate categories. They do hate categories. Yes, these are the people who want to abolish civilization. Good memory, Bot. Yep, that is one of the arguments being made in the book, to abolish civilization. Now, anytime you hear the term civilization or domestication, they are referring to capitalism. They believe that capitalism was forced onto society way back in ancient Sumeria, and therefore, in order to get rid of capitalism, which of course is their ultimate goal, we just need to abolish everything and start over. So that's why they refer to it as civilization. In regards to domestication, they're basically saying when people are domesticated by capitalism, and so that's the reference there. They have about 8,000 ways of saying capitalism in this. Yeah, Reagan found a tweet, and people can find the link in the chat on YouTube. Gender is a part of civilization's domestication. Yeah, I saw that earlier, Reagan. That was a really great find, actually. I remember they allegorically call capitalism a leviathan made from the remnants of the dead, as a reference to how capitalism exploits everyone. Very good, Liquid Marble. That's a good quote. They did say it started in Sumeria, just like the Anunnaki. Maria says, were they the ones comparing boundaries around gender to boundaries around land? I believe so, Maria. I believe so. Good call out. So we got some fun facts in there. Essentially, guys, the people who wrote this document are as far left as you can possibly go. These are queer anarchists. They have crazy ideas about things. Remember, we don't spend any time debunking ideas that are crazy because we would literally be here all day and it doesn't matter anyway because they're not going to listen to us. So we can just put your debunking away. We're not doing that today. Naruto says, last time we learned the phallus is not oh yeah, that's right. This is, for Naruto, this is actually pretty dead on. Last time we learned that the phallus is not biological and can be given away. I might be wrong, but I feel like the phallus is firmly attached to my body. Well, I'm not going to comment on that particular thing number 2, but yes, we did learn that the phallus is not a physical thing. It is it can be given away, apparently. So they've got some crazy ideas in this book. Our goal here is to read their documents to learn what their ideas are. And guys, this is all part of something that I'm doing for the Red Menace Collective, because the Red Menace Collective is another Substack I have. This is where I publish my book chapters of my future books as I'm writing them. And one of the books I'm working on, actually as many as 3 of the books I'm working on right now. Yes, I'm working on many, many books right now, or I at least have ideas or outlines or things like that. As 3 of the books I have outlined in my head right now have either sections about queer or are entirely about queer, because there's a lot to dissect within queer anarchism. And so I've got a whole list of publications I'm working on, because ain't no one else ever done this from an anti-communist perspective before. This is not a Gnostic sex cult. This is something way worse than that. Anyway, I have to read all these documents in order to write the books I want to write. And so I thought, if I have to suffer, you guys have to suffer too. And that's why we're doing Counter-Revolutionary Book Club, because we are a little bit masochistic on this channel after all. And so if you want to get caught up on what I'm doing and follow along, make sure you're signed up for the Red Menace Collective Substack. That is different than carlin.substack.com. It's a completely separate website, and that is redmenacecollective.substack.com. You will get draft chapters of books I'm writing as I'm writing them before they become actual books. You will also get a digital copy of the book, of every book that I write upon completion, and you can actually download my latest book, The Untold Story of the World, or excuse me, A Brief History of Racism, The Untold Story of the World's Most Powerful Word, right now on the Red Menace Collective for members. Membership is $10 a month or $100 a year, and I've just released the first book funded out of the Red Menace Collective. As you guys know, it is called A Brief History of Racism. Basically, what I did is I went back to the invention of the term racism. I said, who invented it? What did it mean? How did it evolve? Where did this word come from? And I tracked the evolution of the term racism from 1902, when it was invented, all the way up until today. And there is actually even a section about Trump's executive orders and stuff like that. So it brought us right up to present moment. The entire evolution of the history of the term racism. It was a fascinating project to write. It is very readable. It is a quick read. I designed it to be a quick read. And so I hope people enjoy it. And if you don't want to join the Red Menace Collective, I don't know why you wouldn't. It's definitely the best idea you can do. But if you don't want to join there, you can get it over on Amazon. It is currently the #1 new release in a couple different categories. The censorship category you can see, which is actually kind of cool, I have to say. Thank you to everyone who's bought the book so far. It is a #1 new release in a couple different categories, and that's kind of neat. And so you can get the Kindle version, you can get the paperback version. And guys, if you have the book already and you've read the book, please make sure you leave a review, because the reviews really help out. We don't have any reviews yet. I know there are many of you that have it. I know there are many of you that are reading it. You just got your copy. I understand. But when you're done, please leave your review. 5-star reviews only. If you've got anything less than 5 stars, keep it to yourself. All right. But leave the review on Amazon. It really does help out, and I would really appreciate it. And I have a surprise coming for the Red Menace Collective this weekend. And I'm going to announce it on Socialism Saturday. But you guys are going to love it. And let me just, do you want me to give you a hint about what the surprise is? Do you guys want a hint? Okay. The hint is, do you guys know how you're always basically skirting my rule around no debunking? Well, I am delivering you on a silver platter the debunking that you have been waiting for. And that is the only hint that I'm going to give you for now. You are going to get a whole debunking's worth of something. And if you want to know what the surprise is, and I really do think you guys are going to like this an awful lot, come to Socialism Saturday this week, and I will tell you what the surprise is. And if you want to take a guess, let me know in the chat, and maybe if you guys get it right, I might tell you. But I don't think you're gonna see that. No, it's not a. You know what? I actually did think about this. I actually did think about this. I was like, if I can literally write a book about anything I want, why don't I just debunk all of James Lindsay's bullshit? And I might do that at some point. I'm going to be like the feud of the anti-woke or something like that. I might do that at some point, but not yet. No, it is much more responsible than that. I promise you. It's not a stream that's debunking. No, it's not of Sophie. Okay. Elena, real communist spotted in my place of work today. New starter. How did I know I hear you ask? Tattoos that looked like oh, you saw the ignorant tattoo style. So yeah, ignorant tattoo style is a dead giveaway for someone who might be a queer anarchist. Thank you, Elena, for the support. I really do appreciate it. No, it's gonna be way better than a debunking stream. You guys are gonna love it. Anyway, there's a surprise coming, and if you want to know what that surprise is, if you want to be the first to know what that surprise is, sign up for the Red Menace Collective. Again, that is redmenacecollective.substack.com. You can also find that by just going to redmenacecollective.com. That'll bring you to a website. I'll bring it here. And so you guys will be the first to know the surprise, but you got to be on the email list over there, and that's going to be the first place I post about it. We'll talk about it on Socialism Saturday, and it's going to be awesome. And with that, I would like to get into Against the Gender Nightmare because we got a lot of stuff to get through. And as a reminder, guys, this is a gender abolitionist document. So this document not only argues that we need to abolish all gender, which it does, but this document also argues that we need to just abolish everything and start again because capitalism has ruined society from the very, 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 very beginning. And the only way to fix things is to go back to the original kind of like foundations of society and just get rid of everything and start again. And so we are picking up on section 10 of the document, and we're just going to continue. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Let me know. This is especially important for new people. The language in this document is very flowery. It is very fluffy. It is very kind of like artsy, and it meanders a little bit. So some of it might be confusing. Don't be embarrassed about it being confusing. Just ask the question, because if you have the question, someone else probably has the question, and that way everyone can learn something, which is ultimately what we're doing here. All right, let's see if my reading tool works today. And if it doesn't, I have a backup because it didn't work last time. All right, let's get this party started.
We've discussed domestication as a process that ensnares us within a monster and infests our very being with a monster's essence. We continue to endeavor to name this monster gender. Freddie Perlman called it Leviathan, but he also had a name for its spirit, his story. If domestication integrates us into the form of Leviathan, then it enchants us with his story. So we turn to this enchantment. A friend, writing in the...
Whoa. It just skipped over a whole section, didn't it? You just skipped over a whole section, reading tool. Watch, it's not going to work. Not going to work. All right, well, that was a fun experiment with that tool. Let's go back to our PDF. I apologize for the disruption, but that's obviously up. It's already frozen the page. All right, we're going back to the PDF. All right, well, we tried. We tried on the website, and it didn't work, and so now we're going back over here. Okay, take two. Apologies for the delay.
We've discussed domestication as a process that ensnares us within a monster and infests our very being with the monster's essence. We continue to endeavor to name this monster gender. Freddie Perlman called it Leviathan, but he also had a name for its spirit, his story. In the first issue of this journal, we explored this sense of delay as the perpetual displacement of a future utopia.
It literally did it again. It's skipping over it again. Okay, his story.
In the first issue of this journal, we explored this sense of delay as the perpetual displacement.
Why isn't it reading it?
In the first issue of this...
It does not want to read this section. Okay, I'll read it then. His story is a chronicle of deeds of the men of at the phallus helm, See, we can't miss this stuff just because the reading tool doesn't want to cooperate. His story is a chronicle of the deeds of the men at the phallus helm of Leviathan, and in its largest sense is its biography of what Hobbes will call the artificial man. There are as many histories as there are leviathans. But history tends to become singular for the same reason that summer and now the whole Fertile Crescent becomes singular. The Leviathan is a cannibal. Remember, the Leviathan is capitalism. It eats its contemporaries as well as its predecessors. It loves a plurality of Leviathans as little as it loves Earth. Its enemy is everything outside of itself. History is born with the first Leviathan. Before or outside of the first Leviathan, there is no history. Okay, so there's no history outside of the Leviathan. This is what we were talking about when they say that capitalism started at the very beginning of civilization. There's no history without the Leviathan. The free individuals of a community without a state did not have a history by definition. They were not encompassed by the immortal carcass that is the subject of history. Such a community was a plurality of individuals, a gathering of freedoms. The individuals had biographies, and they were the ones who were interesting, but the community, as such, did not have a biography, a history. Yet the Leviathan does have a biography, an official one. The king is dead, long live the king. Generations die, but yours lives on. Within the Leviathan, an interesting biography is a privilege conferred on a very few or only on one. The rest of the dull biographies is similar to each other as the Egyptian copies of once beautiful originals. What is interesting now is the Leviathan story, at least to his scribes and historians. Now, listen, I'm going to be honest. I have no effing clue what this is saying, like, at all. And so if you're feeling lost right now, I'm actually feeling lost as well. So we are all lost together, and that's okay. We're rolling with it. To others, as Macbeth will know, the Leviathan story, like its ruler, is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, and signifying nothing. The ruler is killed by an invader or a usurper, and his great deeds die with him. The immortal worm's story ends when it is swallowed by another immortal. The story of the swallowings is the subject of world history, which by its very name already prefigures a singular Leviathan which holds all earth in its entrails. Well, you can't accuse the left of not being artsy. Okay, let's continue.
In the first issue of this journal, we explored this.
It will not read this paragraph. Okay, I'll keep going. A friend writing in the Nihilist journal, Attentat, takes this to mean the Leviathan is constantly decomposing and that its biographers are trained not to see this decomposition. Instead, historians and intellectuals engineer stories to explain the movement of the beast through time. This is called history, but can also progress, destiny, etc. The writer Attentat says the subtle contention in Freddy's thinking entirely breaks from any linear, either progressive or regressive, view of history, arguing instead that history is, quote, a process of interesting completion, destructiveness, falling apart of previous epochs, along with their attitudes, ideas, practicals, and so on. The very phenomenon of history, as his story, its possible unity as narrative and idea is particularly undergirded by this process, which in and of itself is fragile, hanging together of fragments, endlessly shattering, strangely recombining, giving most observers the sense of, quote, delay. All right, we're through the part that I have to read, and now we can go back to the robot.
In the first issue of this journal, we explored this sense of delay as the perpetual displacement of a future utopia promised to us by the soothsayers of historical analysis. It gets better if only we are patient enough to wait. Most accounts of history are simple variants of this impetus to wait, for the material conditions, for heavenly ascent, for the Messiah, for any number of ways to describe the wholeness which awaits us at the end of this or that dialectic. Kamat called this delay the wandering of humanity away from its course. We'll follow our nihilist friend in giving up on this understanding of delay and looking instead to decomposition. This sense of delay cannot be trapped in any periodization, but rather is descriptive of the whole of time consumed within history. This is the same reason that apocalyptic visions have also always defined the endpoint of Leviathan's conception of itself. History is the narration of perpetual decomposition. Attentat argues that such a conception of history would mean an awareness of the unique character of events, but without locating them in any temporal logic. We interpret this as a collection of stories which hint toward the beast's tendencies, but never ascertain its totality. Taken as a whole, these stories do not offer a cohesive metanarrative, only fragmenting. The negative or destructive side of history is for some of us more or less all that history has been or done. In the strict sense, nothing is being worked on or built up in or through history. The places, people, and events in past time that we enjoy or claim, appreciate or appropriate, must be creatively re-identified as non-historical, extrahistorial, or anti-historical current. Any attempt to systematize the episodic explosions of revolt only rationalizes its defeat, reducing it to just another triumph in the perpetual motion of the decomposing beast. In sum, the perspective that says that decomposition is the logic of his story elucidates two things. First, that we were right to deny progress. Second, that we are not believers in its opposite, an inverted regression away from a golden age. As I imagine it, a principal characteristic of whatever preceded his story would be its neutrality, its stony silence at the level of metanarrative. Rather than progress or regression, we could describe historical decomposition as the accelerating complication of event. This acceleration is violent and dangerous. Here and there an eddy may form in which things either slow down or temporarily stabilize in the form of an improvement. What we can say with some certainty is that as historical time elapses, things get more complicated, and these complications so outrun their antecedents that the attempt to explain retroactively becomes ever more confusing. Situationally, we may be getting some purchase for the moment, an angle, a perspective. But what Debord perhaps could not admit, what Perlman perhaps understood, is that decomposition had always been there in our explanation, our diagnosis, and the actions they are said to justify, and that his story is decomposition's double movement. As civilization unravels, it narrates its unraveling. The dead thing, Leviathan, organized life, builds itself up as armor in and around it, which would include machines and a certain stiffening of postures and gestures, and concurrently thinking, and action in human bodies. But the dead thing remains dead, and it breaks down. It functions by breaking down. It creates ever more complex organizations that then decompose, i.e. break down.
So it's saying, remember, it's talking about capitalism here. I know that might be confusing for people because they're using flowery language, but they're talking about capitalism. They're saying, remember, they call capitalism the dead thing. The dead thing is this complex thing, and the complexity just keeps going, but ultimately the dead thing is breaking down. So what they're saying is capitalism eventually is going to, decompose, essentially.
It creates ever more complex organizations that then decompose, i.e. break down. If the question of his story is always already the gender question, then this perspective is crucial to our inquiry because the dead thing in question is gender, the ordering of life, the stiffening of our gestures. But gender has...
The dead thing in question is gender. As a reminder, these people, and they said this earlier in the book, believe that capitalism created gender. It created the social constructs of men and women. It gave men all the power and all the money. It put women in the home doing the unpaid labor of raising the next generation of proletarian workers. The book talks about social reproduction theory. It talks about all these things. So when they're saying the dead thing is gender, remember that gender comes from capitalism. That's what they believe. So both can be dead things simultaneously because one comes from the other.
But gender has no life of its own. It destroys everything before it, then breaks down, it decays, and its decomposing parts are reorganized again. We are split in half, body and soul are recomposed into a gendered unity which itself decays, we rebel and then this rebellion is identified, split once more. It is this interplay of decomposition and recomposition that concerns us. What is this recapture of life other than domestication all over again? Where do we locate gender as domestication if we can see decomposition and recomposition everywhere? The theories we've critiqued have all been attempts to tell an origin story, to historically place gender. But gender cannot be situated at any point along a linear narrative. It is our very inscription into the line. Some theorists of gender will become obsessed with this task, universalizing and totalizing what is really incidence. The outside to gender is not situated.
Hang on, we got a super chat from Annie. Wasn't the god Osiris's penis cut off by his evil and jealous god bro Set, the chosen chaos? Didn't his wife find it and sew it back on and the order was restored? Yeah, I mean, that might not be unrelated to this, Annie. I do appreciate the super chat. T-Bone Man says, it's hard to follow at first, but you breaking it down is very helpful. As a reminder, guys, you have a responsibility in this too. If you don't understand something, you have to ask questions. Either I will answer the question, someone else in the chat will answer the question, but if you're confused, then the best thing to do is ask a question. Don't wait for me to break something down because I'm not a mind reader. I don't know that everyone on the internet is confused by things, okay? So we both have a role in this.
The outside to gender is not situated at either end of this line, but rather where the line breaks apart. If we decide to listen to the self-narration of this breaking apart, then it is because we might hear something within it which shows us where the decomposition can be hastened, where we might sneak out, or ways that others have attempted to evade being recomposed. This is how we can situate our perspective against his story, Leviathan, Gender, et al. 11. In the last few years, there have been several attempts within the anarchist milieu to historicize gender. These attempts have largely focused on readings of two books about the same time period, Caliban and the Witch by Sylvia Federici and Witchcraft and the Gay Counterculture by Arthur Evans.
Witchcraft and the Gay Counterculture? What is that? I guess they'll tell us.
Caliban represents a very thorough analysis of the mechanics of gender during the imposition of capitalism, specifically exploring the European colonialism as well as witch hunts in Western Europe as a case of the accumulation of women's bodies and labor.
Check this out. We need to read this sentence again. Caliban represents a very thorough analysis of the mechanics of gender during the imposition of capitalism, because capitalism created gender according to these people, specifically exploring the European colonization, the European colonialism, as well as witch hunts in Western Europe as a case of the accumulation of women's bodies and labor. Witch hunts, apparently, are a function of capitalism. And Bot found that text in the chat. Thank you, Bot. I'll pull that up for later.
Witchcraft narrates the same story, but from a different perspective. While Caliban is worth reading for its wealth of information, its structure is largely problematic. Federici holds to an essentialist view of gender. She wants to tell the story of capitalism's relationship to women, a category she firmly defends. She dismisses all challenges to the naturalization of the gender binary with little more than an assertion of its correctness. Her tautology is all the more absurd in that she conflates the experiences of women in one part of the world, during one time period, as being the basis of the gendered reality for women all over the globe, at all subsequent times. Consequently, her work wholly ignores the gendered violence against bodies, which do not fit within her neat categories. The vast persecution of faggots during the Inquisition and witch hunt, to name one example, is afforded little more than a scarce mention in her book. To her credit, she does challenge the orthodox Marxist interpretations of history. She claims that the rise of capitalism cannot be seen as progressive if looked at—
Hang on. We're going to listen to this whole paragraph, but I just want to point this out. To her credit, she does challenge the orthodox Marxist interpretations of history. So this book is telling you it is a good thing that this person was pushing back on the quote-unquote orthodox interpretations of Marx. And this is kind of like the basis of the idea of gain-of-function Marxism, right? Where if you listen to someone like James Lindsay, who doesn't know what the F he's talking about, you would think that the only people that these people are influenced by is like Marx and the Frankfurt School and all that stuff. But the fact is, something else happened. Something else came in to co-opt the queer far left. And I think it had to do with punk subculture, to be honest. And something happened to basically mutate the type of communism and socialism that they're talking about. It's not that they don't read Marx. They absolutely do read Marx. They 100% read Marx. But it's like, it's not the only thing that influenced them. And in this case, they're actually saying, we need to push back against these orthodox Marxist interpretations of this, because that's not what's going on. Gain-of-function Marxism, I've covered this on my channel before. I've also covered it on my Substack. You can find videos on the channel about it. You can find articles on my Substack about it. The Too Long Didn't Read with gain-of-function Marxism is that the strain of Marxism that we are dealing with right now in the United States is mutated. It is not pure Marxism. It is not Mao. It is not Marcuse. It is not any of the dead philosophers. It is heavily influenced by queer anarcho-communist subculture, specifically a subculture that started really in the 60s but started bursting out in the 70s and the 80s in the punk music scene, and that is the heaviest influence on queer activists today. So it is a mutated strain of Marxism. That's why we call it gain-of-function Marxism. And again, you got to go to my website and read the write-ups I've done on it many, many, many times now. This is why people got to keep up with what I write and put out there, because if you don't, you become confused real quick. And so they're flat out saying, you know, to her credit, she's doing exactly what we want her to do, which is to push back on these orthodox interpretations of Marxism.
To her credit, she does challenge the orthodox Marxist interpretations of history. She claims that the rise of capitalism cannot be seen as progressive.
To put it bluntly, the queering of communism, well, it's not quite... T-Bone Man, do you know what normativity means? This is a pop quiz just for you. I want to see where you're at. I don't like having to stop and do this, but I will stop and do this if I'm making a point. Do you know what normativity means? Can you define that for us, please? Don't waste too much of my time. I don't like having my time wasted during book club. I just need a yes or no answer in the chat. I don't need a long drawn out story. Do you know what normativity means, yes or no? Can you define it? We're waiting for you. We're waiting. Entire book club stopped just for you. Do you know what normativity means, yes or no? Probably not. Exactly. Probably not. So, in that case, maybe making jokes about things is not the best thing to do, is my point. So maybe refrain. If you have questions, it's fine to have questions, but if you're coming here to make a mockery of things and not listen, that's a problem, okay?
To her credit, she does challenge the orthodox Marxist interpretations of history. She claims that the rise of capitalism cannot be seen as progressive if looked at from the perspective of gender, but also that there is no linear transition to capitalism, only a series of violent episodes of capture and reversal. And yet still her perspective remains all too limited by her own autonomous variant of Marxism. For her, all of the
normativity, for people who don't know, by the way, since I'm assuming that someone has this question, but they're just not asking. What you should have done is say, Carlin, I don't remember. What does normativity mean? That's what you should have done. Okay? Okay, listen. This is the last time I'm going to say this. If you don't know something, it is your responsibility to ask a question. I don't want to hear anything else other than that. I want to hear your interpretation of the text. I want to hear questions. That's it. That is all I want. We're doing a book club, okay? Normativity means the norms that uphold capitalist society. Capitalism is not just an economic system. Capitalism is also a cultural system, according to the far left. So we're talking about the social norms that uphold capitalist society.
For her, all of the atrocities of the witch hunts are to be explained by analyzing the economic necessities of the capitalist mode of production. More specifically, these atrocities are necessitated by the requirement that women perform reproductive labor within the newly forged proletariat. This could be read as a useful movement away from the absurd notion that contemporary gender violence can be uniquely and primarily explained in the domestic labor.
We're going to go back. More specifically, these atrocities are necessitated by the requirement that women perform reproductive labor within the newly forged proletariat. What does that mean? What do people think that that means? If you do not know, say you don't know, because if you don't say I don't know, I cannot identify who knows what this means and who doesn't. More specifically, these atrocities are necessitated by the requirement that women perform reproductive labor within the newly forged proletariat. What does that mean? Waiting for answers in the chat. Yep, Reagan got it. It means mothers giving birth to children. That's what they're talking about. Does everyone understand this? Liquid Marble says, I think that this means that in the nuclear family, women are subjected to birthing and raising the next generation of workers. Yup. Suzanne says, women give birth and are uncompensated for their efforts. Yup. Green-Eyed Lady said, giving birth. Exactly. Vince says that women do the unpaid labor of birthing children. Exactly. Rottweiler says motherhood. Exactly. That's what we're talking about here.
This could be read as a useful movement away from the absurd notion that contemporary gender violence can be uniquely and primarily explained in the domestic labor of European women in the last century.
They consider women having children, giving birth, doing the unpaid labor of raising the children to be a form of gender violence because they believe that capitalism forces women into that position.
This could be read as a useful movement. Yet still her cathexis upon economics feels like an attempt to project the same notion into the more distant past. We've already discussed the limitations of this approach with regard to gender. The reorientation toward an earlier period doesn't change these limits. The text feels all the more limited for the fact that she makes maybe 2 mentions of the existence of gendered violence before this period and offers no explanations as to how that violence came about. This leaves us with that same poverty of naturalized gender. A central theme of her work is primitive accumulation, the first accumulation of a population by Leviathan. She sees this as a transition in her own teleology. However, the beast against which her subjects revolt is not born of this or any fixed period, it is constantly decomposing and being born anew. Its mode of capture in the form of gender is not predicated on its mode of production. It is firstly a bodily and spiritual operation upon which an economic mode is sutured. Her story begins amidst a revolt precisely because its subjects are rebelling against their earlier capture. The following round of accumulation, consequently, cannot be the first. It is also worth noting that in her exhaustive narrative of the history of the witch hunts, she remains dismissive if not silent about the role of magic itself. This amounts to a purely materialist reading which cannot account for the spiritual dimensions of domestication as capture. Federici's tale is one story about an
Annie, do you know what this is? Annie says, what if the mother likes having labor and babies? Is it still labor? And I know you say it's a rhetorical question, but do you know what you're really doing there? You're debunking. We ask not to debunk. Don't debunk. Every time you guys debunk, you are preventing yourself from learning. You are also accomplishing nothing because no amount of debunking will ever change what the left believes. So you need to stop yourself every time you feel the inclination to do this, because it is a wasted effort and it is a waste of time, and it doesn't help you to learn, and it doesn't help us to beat the left. All it does is give you a moment of like momentary righteous superiority, and that is it, and that doesn't really accomplish anything. So I appreciate that.
Federici's tale is one story about an intensification of the process we call gender. She may be wrong in situating that story within a specific periodization and in her account of why the events played out, but we're willing to sift through to glean what we may from it. Our instinct is that she may well be correct to pay particular attention to these events, but only on the chance that those rebels burnt at the stake may reveal some occult secrets regarding their own conflict against leviathanic gender. Arthur Evans' book is more interesting.
Leviathanic gender.
Arthur Evans' book is more interesting in that it diverges from Federici's on these exact points. Where she asserts an essential woman, he specifically explores the witch hunts as an attempt to destroy a whole range of sexually deviant and gender-variant people. Where Federici limits her critique to the rise of capitalism, Evans indicts all of Western civilization in his. Where Federici is indifferent to the practices and beliefs of her story's victims, Evans tries to listen and perceive what arcane revelations they might offer in a violent and anarchic war against gendered civilization. He also weaves a critique of history throughout his text, indicting historians for their complicity in the aggrandizing of Leviathan and the erasure of those it has tried to destroy. Most provocatively, he carves out space for myth within his narrative. And yet still he doesn't go far enough. Instead of an anti-history, he counters with gay history, as if history's only problem was its homophobia. As with Federici's naturalization of the category women, we must also flinch at Evans' uncritical deployment.
Okay, so they were just critical. I just want to point out a larger point here. They said, as with Federici's naturalization of the category of women. So basically what they're saying is, remember Bot said earlier, these people do not want categories to exist. These are gender nihilists. I mean, these are nihilists in general, but these are particularly gender nihilists in that they want to abolish all gender. So when they're saying, as Federici's naturalization of the category of women, they're kind of bemoaning the fact that, you know, these people perceive women to be a naturalized category, something that is innate, something that is biological, because these people don't believe that gender is innate or biological. They told us so earlier in the book. And what they think is that gender is a social construct that was created by capitalism, this oppressive force, the Leviathan. That's what they mean when they say Leviathan. And so they're kind of bemoaning there. You know, she's just giving it away. She's saying that gender is naturalized. She's not even arguing the point. So that's what that section's about. Hey, AP, thank you for becoming a member of the channel. I really do appreciate the support.
As with Federici's naturalization of the category women, we must also flinch at Evans' uncritical deployment of some universal gay people into which all the divergent and unique heretics fit. This
and in the same way that they're bemoaning Federici's naturalization of women, they're also saying, and what is this guy's name? Evans just naturalized the category of gay people. Because they want the elimination of all categories. Categories are all created by capitalism. That's what they believe. Categories create hierarchies. Hierarchies mean someone is oppressed and someone is not oppressed, the oppressor. And so that's why they're saying that.
This categorical construction is the exact recomposition alluded to in the attentat piece, the swallowing whole of so many decomposed fragments by a reincarnation of gender. A queer critique must sidestep this trap.
See?
So why read these books? What remains of them if we strip away the grand meta-narratives about the movement of abstractions like history, or if we refuse to impose our contemporary subject categories back through time? The remainder is a collection of stories. And these stories differ from his story in that they are about the exploits and adventures of individuals, not the machinery which holds them captive. Stories interest us also because they do not seize upon this or that time, but enchant the teller and the listener into active participation. The story is the primary method of the magical practices of oral culture. His story is the Socratic ideal of these stories, the one story which cannibalizes all the others. Critical histories like Caliban and witchcraft only serve to integrate these tales into the all-consuming one. This becomes a game of abstraction, how a collection of trial statements, handbooks on Inquisition, heretical documents and biographies of accused witches become the accumulation of women within capitalist mode of production or gay history or the old religion. Interestingly enough, it has been argued by some that the burning alive of tens of thousands of women as witches during the 16th and 17th centuries may usefully be understood as the attempted, and nearly successful, extermination of the last orally preserved traditions of Europe, the last traditions rooted in the direct, participatory experience of plants, animals and elements, in order to clear the way for the dominion of alphabetic reason over a world increasingly construed as a passive and mechanical set of objects.
They literally just argued that capitalism is responsible for the witch hunts. Because capitalism was trying to destroy this indigenous oral history, and they utilized the witch hunts to do that so that they could enforce capitalism in a stronger way.
It is not surprising that as a consequence most accounts of this period suffer from the tragedy it imposed upon our conceptions of ourselves and of time. To truly read against his story is to read with attention to the stories themselves, without an attempt to systematically or universally place them. In a world that lacks the abstract ideals, directionality and universal moralism of historical thought, stories are useful in that they tell us discrete lessons that might assist us in our day-to-day conflict. Only when we stop trying to decipher the truth of his story, can we actually notice the subtle web of meanings and messages hidden between the stories at our disposal. Here are a few we've noticed. Most of the stories about the imposition of gender are also stories about the creation of institutions and the flight of individuals from them. At times called enclosure or industrialism, these institutions tend to separate us from the vast experiences of life. Once we could find our own food, make our own clothes, discover our own sexual practices, heal ourselves and commune directly with the wild spirit. Now all of these experiences are mediated through farms, schools, churches, and hospitals. The institutionalization of the world could be understood as the material armors of the spiritual poverty imposed through domestication.
Okay, so domestication, there's that word again. When they say domestication, they mean you have become domesticated under capitalism. Basically, like, you used to be a wild animal, and you roamed free in the woods, and you had all these spiritual cultures, and you were much more connected to the earth and all the things. And then capitalism came in, and they said, you have to live a certain way, and you have to do this, and you have to do that, and you have to do this other thing. And when you acquiesce to that, you were domesticated. It's like how dogs used to be like wolves, and then they were domesticated to be like, to be able to be in the home and stuff like that, to be the pets of humans. Well, it wasn't always like that. They used to be wolves. And so they're basically saying that capitalism has taken us from being a wolf to being like a poodle or something like that, a teacup poodle with a frou-frou haircut in the home. That is the imposition of capitalism.
The institutionalization of the world could be understood as the material armors of the spiritual poverty imposed through domestication. This institutionalization is always violent. The ascendancy of institutional medicine, for example, emerges out of the ashes of herbalists burnt alive by witch hunters. Gender is constantly redefined and reinscribed through these institutions. Foremost among them is the family. The enclosure of forests and fields corresponds to an enclosure of people's means of care and survival into this private familial unit.
There it is. There it is. Oh, we just hit social reproduction theory, didn't we? Okay, now it's going to get good. So they're saying that gender is constantly redefined and inscribed on these institutions. Gender, of course, is one aspect of capitalism. But then they're saying, but you know what the real problem is? The family. Because the family forces people into this privatized unit. They believe the nuclear family is a privatized unit in which they only have access to the care that is based on the means of their family. So if they have a rich family, they have access to really good standards of care. If they have a poor family, they do not have access to really good standards of care. They might not have insurance, they don't have money, that sort of thing. So they're saying that that you are enclosed, you are basically trapped in this privatized familiar unit. And then it's in the next sentence, it's literally going to call, look at this. The family becomes the primary unit for enforcing private property, enforcement of discipline, and the policing of sexuality. The definition of capitalism that the left uses for people who are new is private property ownership. The reason they want to destroy the family is because, as they're literally saying in this book, the family becomes the primary unit for enforcing private property, enforcement of discipline, and policing of sexuality.
The family becomes the primary unit for enforcing private property, enforcement of discipline, and policing of sexuality. While Leviathan attempts to swallow the entire world, devouring any divergence, it inadvertently brings the outside within. Christianity made this law. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. The Nazis attempted to perfect this racist science as Gleichschaltung. But the elimination of wild diversity is never total. The newly internalized divergence often re-emerges in the form of a heresy. This constant rupture of hegemony often seems like a widespread decomposition of the unity of this or that institution. Regarding gender, this heresy is elsewhere called the queer. Leviathan will, from time to time, deploy a specialized force of police to put down these heresies. These are called Inquisition.
We need to go back. Okay. So they're basically about to equate the Inquisition to capitalist oppression. So let's see. Regarding gender, this heresy is elsewhere called queer. So queer is pushback against anything that is normative. Queer is about destabilizing the normal, the legitimate, the dominant. That all means things that uphold the cultural aspects of capitalism. Leviathan will, capitalism will, from time to time, deploy a specialized force of police to put down these heresies. These are called inquisitions. So if you are engaging against capitalism, according to this, you are literally a heretic, and capitalism will make sure you get your inquisition.
Regarding gender, this heresy is elsewhere called the queer. Leviathan will, from time to time, deploy a specialized force of police to put down these heresies. These are called inquisitions. The holy war comes home. The war against the outside is turned inward. Little will be known of the doctrines and practices of these heretic sects, for the Inquisition's method is also historical. It aims to annihilate their stories as much as their bodies. These inquisitions, whatever century they occur, will each emerge as a more advanced and innovative laboratory of torture and subjection, the most perverse in the recorded history of state repression. No expense will be spared in eliminating these internal colonies. Active resistance to Leviathan often takes on an ecstatic character. Freddie Perlman will refer to the great dances spreading like fire throughout leagues of deserters. Inquisitors and witch hunters will be haunted by the image of nighttime orgies and Sabbath. Elsewhere we've written that queer desire is the locus point of the dread of an entire social order's self-annihilation. The most beautiful moments of insurgency are imminent to a decomposition of gendered and sexual roles. ecstasy from ecstasis is to be outside one's self. To flee from domestication is also to flee from the selves to which we've been constrained. To be outside these selves is the initial break. These breaks are often couched in the language of their times, as animism or renewal of long vanquished deities, the apocalypse as an imminent lived reality. What is consistent is the emphasis on direct and immediate joy. These eruptions of revolt are not limited to this or that historical period, but are universal throughout his story. They happen in cities, in the countryside, amidst the peasantry, and in labor camps. The repression of this ecstatic revolt will always include a sexual dimension. This repression aims to reinscribe the body and spirit of the resistors into their domestic selves. The use of sexual violence as a repressive tactic or the almost universal conflation of criminal charges against homosexuality, heresy and witchcraft help to illustrate this. Many witch hunters implied or explicitly accused witches of having sexual relations with their animal familiars, continuing the Christian tradition of separating humanity out of the rest of the living world, while marking the beastly as worthy of domination. Nudity, hallucinogens and unkempt hair all become sensual crimes of the body. Collective forms of sexuality and sociality are criminalized in order to maximize productive time. Rape is consistently used as a tactic of domination by conquering armies, torture by inquisitors, and division amidst rebel populations.
True.
The state, at various moments, institutionalizes and subsumes prostitution, both as a pressure valve against revolt, but also as a cure for deviant sexual practices. Non-reproductive sexualities are annihilated both for the challenge they pose to the emergent heterosexual matrix, but also for the conspiracies and escape plots implied in these.
Yeah, so Reagan asked in the chat, are we basically describing how to be deviant? Yeah, because deviant, of course, is queer. Deviant goes against the normal, the legitimate, the dominant. So they're saying capitalism tries to force you into this box of being in this specific way sexually, and of course that results in procreation within the nuclear family. But we believe that you should be over here because we don't like, capitalism's oppression on us and our sexuality.
Non-reproductive sexualities are annihilated both for the challenge they pose to the emergent heterosexual matrix, but also for the conspiracies and escape plots implied in these relations. Indigenous resistors are always denounced by missionaries as lacking morality regarding sexuality and gender. This immorality is mobilized in expansive fantasies of colonialists and pioneers. The bodies of colonized resistors are marked for rape and execution. These operations lay the groundwork for the genocidal endeavors of witch hunts and holocausts. As we are alienated from the world, we are alienated from our bodies. In order to preempt this type of escape from ourselves, Leviathan must institute ever more complex subjects for its constituents. These subjects are the end result of a litany of techniques aimed at mechanizing, disciplining, emotionally manipulating, and controlling the human body. The reduction of certain bodies to baby factories is a prime example, but also the scientific diagnostics of various sexual deviants or the disciplinary control of gender-variant people. Those who willfully or instinctually resist these techniques must be classified as other. This
Queer.
othering is often composed of racializing and gendering processes. Against these others, no violence is excessive.
See, the minute that you have classification of something is the minute that something becomes oppressed, right? So those who willfully or instinctually resist these techniques must be classified as other. They must be classified as abnormal. They must be classified as queer, and that's when the oppression starts.
This othering is often composed of racializing and gendering processes. Against these others, no violence is excessive. The other, whether witch or terrorist or drapetomaniac or faggot or whatever, is the legitimate recipient of all sorts of brutalities designed to either assimilate or annihilate the deviancy. These crimes become crimen acceptum. Once Leviathan has constructed its institutions and the corresponding machine-like bodies, its primary project becomes the movement of these tendencies toward infinity. All of our efforts to critique the child in the previous issue of this journal are in response to this project of uninhibited growth. Those who practice any form of resistance to this project must therefore be the other worthy of annihilation. The child functions as the fantastic future of the parents' race. Any decline in the population will be seen as a threat to the state, which in turn will ramp up the techniques of sexual repression described above. Workers and slaves will be encouraged to produce more workers and slaves. In these moments, the sexual and abortive dimensions of heresy and witchcraft will come to the forefront of the Inquisition trials. It is not a coincidence that witches and queer heretics were executed for having allegedly sacrificed children to the devil.
Queer
The demonization
heretics.
of birth control can also be understood through this lens.
Oh!
This fanatical desire to increase population lead even the most misogynist religious and state leaders to proclaim that women's sole virtue was their natural capacity for childbirth.
See, this is where goes back to why we don't debunk things, and I think it was Annie earlier that said, what if women want to be mothers, though? Is that still considered to be labor? She was joking, of course, and we've dispensed with that, but I just want to point this out. They're saying that the demonization of birth control can also be understood as a way to oppress women. Because birth control, of course, gives women a way out of the gender binary because they aren't forced into a position of having the oppressed children that you have in the nuclear family. So it's saying here, the demonization of birth control can also be understood through this lens. This fanatical desire to increase population even leads the most misogynist, religious, and state leaders to proclaim that women's sole virtue was their natural capacity for childbirth. So what they would say, Annie, when you asked earlier if what if women want to be mothers, isn't that okay then? Well, what they would say is that capitalism has programmed you to want to be a mother, that's not part of your innate wishes, that's not part of your innate desires. You just believe it is because you have been domesticated under capitalism to believe that that's what you're supposed to do. And this is why we do not debunk the left, because there is always an answer for everything, and they don't care about logic and reason and reality. I think that is pretty clear. And so trying to get someone to care about logic and reason and reality when they obviously and clearly don't is a fool's errand. You are never going to win that argument. You are never going to win that debate. It is never going to change anything. All it does is suck all your energy away from actually defeating the real problem. And in order to defeat the real problem, you have to understand the real problem as they understand themselves.
This fanatical desire to increase population lead even the most misogynist religious and state leaders to proclaim that women's sole virtue was their natural capacity for childbirth. As Martin Luther said, whatever their weaknesses, women possess one virtue that cancels them all: they have a womb and they can give birth. Rationalism, reason, enlightenment never lead to the abolition of these genocidal and bloodthirsty practices. Rather, these ideologies only lead to the institutionalization and increased technological sophistication of violence. These ideologies end up serving as justification for brutality against the irrational other. There is no linear progress out of this brutality. While the good subjects may be encouraged to infinitely reproduce, the actual children of the racial or colonized other will often be slaughtered with impunity. Even while promoting the ideology of the child, the state is constantly and discreetly acting to impose a scientific campaign of eugenics, extermination and forced sterilization upon those it deems to be a racial outside. These are only a few of an infinity of lessons we might extract from any constellation of stories, lessons which have as much relevance today as they would in centuries past. Rather than a narrative about domestication as an idea, we have a fragmentary and esoteric set of tales that each describes what domestication looks like in a particular moment. More excitingly, they also describe how people chose to rebel against this process. To tell ourselves these stories is to connect to the individuals and moments which have attempted an escape from the nightmare of his story. This connection becomes most meaningful when the stories enchant our own being and are given body through our own experiences. These stories only matter insofar as they produce a visceral understanding of flight from this ancient protocol of separation and capture. This is the dimension that must always be centered in a newfound reading of his story as decomposition. Decomposition isn't only a force of nature or accident, it is primarily the willful refusal of Leviathan by individuals and groups. Leviathan breaks down when those who maintain its springs and wheels refuse to do so, when they flee to the mountains, sing, dance and practice ecstatic ritual, when they scream, loot and burn, when they rip out the armor, tear off the mask and burn the beast to the ground. If these stories illustrate instances of domestication, they also illustrate the imposition of gender. The inherent decomposition which afflicts gender is what we call the queer. Not this or that historically constitutes.
Okay. This seems important. If the stories illustrate instances of domestication, they also illustrate the imposition of gender. Okay, domestication means domesticated under capitalism. Capitalism created gender. Therefore, stories of domestication will also illustrate stories of the imposition of gender. That just goes together. If capitalism created gender, then stories about domestication under gender will inherently involve the imposition of these social constructs of gender. Next sentence. The inherent decomposition which afflicts gender is what we call queer. Not this or that historically constituted subject category, but all the divergent bodily and spiritual expressions which escape their role. So gender is binary, you have men and women. What they're saying is queer is non-binary. Non-binary means no binary. Queer is outside of the gender binary that has been imposed upon us through the domestication, through capitalism. Yes, the housewife is domesticated. Exactly, Bot.
The inherent decomposition which afflicts gender is what we call the queer. Not this or that historically constituted subject category, but all the divergent bodily and spiritual expressions which escape their roles. In the first issue of the journal, we said that this was a queerness understood negatively. As rebellion decomposition is intrinsic to stories about domestication, so is the outpouring of queer desire. For this reason, dogmatists have accused us of being ahistorical and idealist. To the former, we have no rebuttal. We'd happily find ourselves outside of the story of mass rapists, kings and industrialists. We certainly won't cling to any of the identities offered within it, nor trust any of the prescriptions laid out by its scholars. Even worse would be to be organized by such a prescription of history. When our friends in Attentat described the recomposition and further decomposition which follows any decay of history, we read this as the organization which follows moments of rupture, and the predictable falling apart of all such political organizations. If we follow Rubin to say that all organization is predicated on the exchange of gendered bodies, then we must also recognize inevitable rebellion of bodies against political organization. Radical or feminist organizations are not exempt from this decomposition. It is routinely referred to as burnout or infighting, though we could understand it as an instinctual refusal to be captured and mobilized by this or that organization. After all, the tendency of queerness against his story has always been the ecstasy of life lived outside of time, without concern for whether the time is right, for the material conditions or for the children.
Hang on. AP, you're reaching with this. AP says Marxism is the origin of feminism. Well, no, not exactly. Radical or feminist organizations are not exempt from this decomposition. It is routinely referred to as burnout or infighting, that we could understand it as instinctual or refusal to be captured and mobilized by this or that organization. So, I mean, feminism, like, you know, certainly there are connections to be made, but there's also many different types of feminism. And honestly, it's kind of like that's not actually... Feminism cannot be queer Marxism because feminism, second wave feminism anyway, the one that actually believes in women, believes that women are a thing. So it is not possible that feminism came from Marxism because literally they believe capitalism created the social construct of women. Feminists, second wave feminists, do not believe that being a woman is a social construct. So these are inherently two very different ideologies at their foundation. Now, if we get into third wave feminism, then we're getting into the idea that trans women are women and all that bullshit. So that is a different thing, but that's not really, I wouldn't even say that's feminism. That's queer anarchism. Yeah, this is actually the topic of Sophie's book. Sophie wrote a whole book about how Sophie Lewis is our favorite abolish the family socialist. She just had a book come out called Enemy Feminisms, and it's literally a book about the enemy forms of feminism, the feminism that the Marxists, the queer anarchists, the communists do not like. So when you're saying Marxist origins of feminism, that is a very conservative, low-level take. That's no offense to you. I know you're still relatively new here, so you're still coming up to speed, so I'm not saying any offense to you, but that is a what we call a bullshit conservative talking point that fundamentally misunderstands what these people actually believe. Ultimately, if these people do not believe that women are a real thing, then they are not feminists. And these people do not believe that women are a real thing.
After all, the tendency of queerness against his story has always been the ecstasy of life lived outside of time, without concern for whether the time is right, for the material conditions or for the children. Queerness must always emerge as out of its time, deviant, irrational. To the latter charge we can only shrug. The Socratic trick of ideas doesn't really concern us. We'll leave the universals and the big stories to the historians. We'll concern ourselves instead with the beautiful moments of heresy and revolt, the lived experiences, bodily practices and spiritual intensity, which hint toward our own. The resistance is the only human component of the entire his story. All the rest is leviathanic progress. Second mythos, Lilith and Eve. In the patriarchal mythology of Judeo-Christian civilization, Adam was the first man, and God gave him a wife. Most know about Eve, his second wife. Fewer tell of his first, Lilith. Lilith differed in that she refused to be subservient to Adam. She wouldn't lay beneath him in the missionary position, and so she was expelled from Eden. Upon her expulsion, she became a demon, a succubus, who traveled through night and through time, breeding with other demons and unleashing evil spirits. It is said that at night she still tempts women to leave their husbands, turns men into faggots, encourages all manner of non-reproductive sexuality, and even steals and eats children.
Are they going to make the argument that Lilith is queer? Oh, please let them make the argument that Lilith is queer. That would just be, it would be the chef's kiss. It would be beautiful.
God the Father couldn't make the same mistake twice, and so he fashioned Adam's second wife, Eve, out of one of Adam's own ribs, ensuring her obedience. And still she disobeyed. She ate the fruit from the forbidden tree of knowledge, and both she and her husband were banished from Eden. Some, such as Walter Benjamin, will view this as the expulsion of humanity from primitive communism. All the subsequent stories of the holy book of this religion is...
Oh shit! Oh shit! They just said that when Adam and Eve were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, that was the expulsion of humanity from primitive communism. Again?
Some, such as Walter Benjamin, will view this as the expulsion of humanity from primitive communism. All the subsequent stories of the holy book of this religion is largely a lament of civilized life. Its first chapter narrates the fall, and the following chapters tell of the miseries within an exodus from various civilizations. But what was this forbidden knowledge? What was the original sin? A certain heresy tells that the forbidden knowledge was the realization that a certain type of sex leads to reproduction. Once Adam and Eve knew this, they couldn't unlearn it. From here, all of their activities were tied to an emerging symbolic order of domination.
Yeah, actually, Fellium in the chat is saying that means the origin of man is communism. Primitive communism. And then they were kicked out.
From here, all of their activities were tied to an emerging symbolic order of domination. Whereas before they had simply indulged in utopia without a future, now their actions had consequences. From this knowledge stems the invention of the role of the father, as well as the knowledge necessary for agriculture, and even the first form of the rational thought which would later become science. Patriarchy, civilization, reproductive futurism. All of it stems from this abominable discovery. The Church's misogynists will blame Eve for this discovery.
Well, as we covered earlier, Kyle, they've already pretty much denounced that sort of thing. So Kyle in the chat says, pretty sure Walter Benjamin was a Frankfurt School critical theorist. I mean, I don't know either way. I don't remember off the top of my head. But what I will tell you is that earlier in the book, you may have just gotten here, but in the chapter that we're looking at right now, they literally denounce the more orthodox forms of Marxism. So they're going against it, which is the entire premise of gain-of-function Marxism. So it wouldn't, you know, that would actually make sense because they're not on his side on that one.
The Church's misogynists will blame Eve for this discovery and expulsion, but as we well know, it is the fathers, herders, husbands, inquisitors and witch hunters who put these arcane secrets to use in the mechanization of the body. These same woman-haters will sentence countless women and faggots to burn for having fallen under the influence of the rebel demon Lilith. If we cannot unlearn these secrets, what would it mean to destroy the machinery which dominates us through them? Can we recall Lilith and fly with her at night? 12.
Gain-of-function Marxism is an idea that we all came up with on a stream, yeah.
Of all these stories, there is one which occurs consistently in almost any worthwhile history of gender, the splitting of the mind from the body. Various accounts will attribute this split to different times and places.
We're about to get Gnostic, aren't we? This is about to go in a very Gnostic direction, isn't it? Of all the stories, there is one which occurs consistently in almost any worthwhile history of gender, the splitting of the mind from the body. All right.
Various accounts will attribute this split to different times and places, but its centrality and power are beyond question. Anti-civilization critiques will often locate this as a primary emergence of dualism in the world, whereas Federici will find it in the machinations of the witch hunts, Evans in the rise of industrialism. Again, the precise origins interest us less than its repeated and unending operation. Wherever it started, the split widens and continues to tear us away from ourselves. It is intuitive that such a split would be necessary in order to acclimate wild beings into those beings fit for labor in the world of work. If one is solely reliant on their own sensual perception of the world, the relation of their body to the bodies of other animals, plants and humans, then that bodily awareness is precisely what must be destroyed for the workers to be born. The disciplining of the body is the precondition of industrial existence. This disciplining of the body can be understood as an internalization of the warfare occurring outside of it. The battleground of social control becomes the body itself, the site of an eternal conflict between reason and passion.
Okay, so people don't understand why queer people look odd. But think about it this way. If you believe the battleground of social control becomes the body itself, the site of an eternal conflict between reason and passion, enlightenment and darkness. If you believe the body is the personification of social control, and you are rebelling against what you believe is a oppressive force that has taken over all of society with the specific goal of controlling people's bodies, then are you going to present in a way that aligns with so-called normal? No, you're not. You're going to look odd. You're going to purposefully make yourself look different. That's why they look weird, because they believe that the battleground of social control of the body is what we're talking about. Kev says they look weird because they're embodying their political and cultural beliefs. That's exactly right. Real Deal says, why can't these people just leave other people alone? Because that's not their values. And coming into book club and saying, I just don't understand why people can't leave each other alone. I mean, it's a strategy, bro, but it's not going to solve the problem. So my recommendation is you pull up a chair, you learn what these people actually believe. You obviously don't know what these people actually believe if you're coming into my chat and saying, I just am so confused about why people can't leave other people alone. Pull up a chair. We will teach you why. They have different values than you do, and if you don't understand their values, you are never going to understand why they do what they do.
The battleground of social control becomes the body itself, the site of an eternal conflict between reason and passion, enlightenment and darkness. On the one side, there are the forces of reason, parsimony, prudence, sense of responsibility, self-control. On the other, the low instincts of the body, lewdness, idleness, systematic dissipation of one's vital energies. The battle is fought on many fronts because reason must be vigilant against the attacks of the carnal self, and prevent the wisdom of the flesh from corrupting the powers of the mind. In the extreme case, the person becomes a terrain for a war of all against all. Others will call this civil war. We will say it is part and parcel of the capture of the body in domestication. The body is a
the body is a microcosm of this phenomenon. That's exactly what I just said. Others will call this civil war, but we will say it's part and parcel of the capture of the body in domestication. Domestication means you have been domesticated by capitalism. They have captured your body. The body is a microcosm for this phenomenon. They look weird because they are rebelling against the domestication of capitalism.
The commodification of bodies and of their capacities leads to an estrangement from self, a disassociation from the majority of one's activity and experience. The body is reified and reduced to an object. This separation and objectification of the body arrives at its own self-realization through Cartesian philosophy. Hobbes will enact a related attack upon the body in reducing it to the functioning of a machine. In later times, this mechanized view will reach a new apex through the theory of genetics. More esoteric theorists of genetics will argue that body is a machine vessel for sentient and selfish genes which deploy said bodies in an effort to eternally perpetuate themselves. The philosophical mechanization of the body becomes so total that it is projected back through history and into our very biology. In a strange paradox, science revives God as the ultimate refutation of free will, genetic manipulation and nanotechnological methods of surveillance and control are only the most contemporary manifestations of this archaic split. But the projection of this invention onto the physical world is not done philosophically, it is done through bodily violence. The torture chambers of witch hunters, Nazi doctors and vivisectors are also the laboratories for the emergence of the mechanized body. This is also, of course, the violence of gendered domestication, as gender is that first dualism and...
Bot in the chat says, this must be why they always say bodies, because it's about recapturing your body from domestication and capitalism. Yeah, that's actually a really good point, Bot. So you know how they don't do this as much anymore, but they used to do this all the time. They would say black and brown bodies, queer bodies. They would refer to each other as a body. And I guess they still do it from time to time. We do hear them do that, but it was like, especially like you heard this if you were like listening to like the Evergreen State documentary and things like that, like bodies, these bodies, we need bodies. Or even actually when the Columbia encampment got raided almost a year ago now, they were talking about having white bodies line up in front of black bodies so that the white bodies could protect the black bodies. So you're right. Bot says this is why they must always say bodies, because they are talking about recapturing the body from domestication, the body being fundamentally distinct from the mind.
This is also, of course, the violence of gendered domestication, as gender is that first dualism and remains the primary operation upon the body. The body is continuously dissected so as to identify and naturalize the biological differences which supposedly justify the entirety of the gendered world. The sex-gender dichotomy, but also the dichotomies of race, are neatly mapped over the body-mind, and corresponds to an unending set of disciplinary measures and techniques of the self designed to maintain binary conformity. Black and feminine bodies are imagined as indocile and in need of disciplining, while white masculine bodies are believed to be rational and tame.
So true.
Bodies viewed with any innate connection to animality can then justifiably be exposed to hard labor, sexual violence, and extermination. Personally, any inquiry into the split between the mind and body yields a crazy diffusion of revelations. I immediately think of the experience of motion sickness as a worthwhile example. As an instinctual response to feeling motion without consciously perceiving it, this nausea is a helpful defense mechanism against the inadvertent consumption of various poisons. Outside of industrialism, this phenomenon is only experienced on the off chance that someone eats a hallucinogen. Yet in a world like our own, where we are constantly disassociating from the movement of our bodies, this nausea becomes universal. The repetitive motion injuries from my performance of service work is another reminder of a nearly total disconnect of my perception from the actual movement of my body. Split widens through our acclimation to this constant pain and dizziness. The further severance of perception functions as a tragic survival strategy. Regarding gender, the split is all the more blatant. As a teenager, my own experience of dysphoria and body dysmorphia led to the self-enactment of a whole range of disciplinary measure and torture in the form of anorexia. This was an experience I shared with the vast majority of my friends who grew up as girls and queers. These techniques of self-control reappear in the context of sex work. In order to more profitably sell our sexual labor, we are constantly project the ideal of gender upon our bodies, mutilating them and reducing them to objects of our own mechanization. More than just physiology.
Wait. In order to more profitably sell our sexual labor, we are constantly project the ideal of gender upon our bodies, mutilating them and reducing them to objects of our own mechanization. Bot says, are they saying anorexia comes on because people are trying to recreate? Yeah, actually, I bet that they would see that not necessarily a perfect form of escape from oppression, but I can see where you're going with that, Bot.
More than just physiology, this domination concerns itself with gestures, grooming, communication, sexual propensity. In the actual experience of sex work, the split widens again. While some horrifying John is touching me, my mind struggles to be anywhere but my own body. I think about the capital, about my bank account, what I'll have for dinner, anything besides what is actually occurring to my body. I've experienced this flight from the body in countless other moments, while being arrested, while being sexually assaulted, while drunk. Even the experience of walking through the hallways of a high school can tear us from ourselves. How should I carry myself today so as not to face the predictable violence of a queer basher? The story of the mind-body split gives us a helpful tool in understanding the complexity and nuance of the contention that domestication is the capture and engendering of our bodies. Where Freddie Perlman saw springs and
domestication is the capture and engendering of our bodies. So when you are domesticated under capitalism, your body is engendered. Does everyone understand? The story of the mind-body split gives us a helpful tool in understanding the complexity and nuance of the contention that to be domesticated under capitalism is the capture and engendering of bodies, the enforcement of gender on the body. Does everyone understand? Yep, capitalism is a distraction from the self. You cannot know your true self under capitalism. Hey, thanks, Tayton, for the super chat. I really do appreciate it. Good to see you.
Where Freddie Perlman saw springs and wheels filling the armor-encased body, we can read this as the reordering of the living body through its conflict with the rational mind. The fantasy of biological sex, of race, and all other supposedly natural categories correspond to this same logic of severance of bodies from each other and the mind from the body. Taxonomies of the body consistently serve to rationalize, systematize and place the varied happenstances of the body into a leviathanic structure. This mechanistic theory of biology attempts to lay down our destiny. 13. Most theories of the split between mind and body miss a concomitant, yet unique, split, the material from the spiritual. The separation and obscuring of the spiritual dimension of gendered existence leaves us with a tragic inability to express or even really comprehend the implications of these operations of capture. To ignore the spiritual dimension of domestication leaves us with only half the story, with a crass, mechanistic materialism that can only offer us crass, mechanistic solutions. If the human body and not the steam engine, and not even the clock, was the first machine developed by capitalism, then what is remains of all the capacities?
If the human body, not the steam engine, not even the clock, we've talked about how time is capitalist before. If the human body was the first machine developed by capitalism, then what remains of all our capabilities of the body, which cannot effectively put to use or rationalize by this technological innovation? So what they're saying is capitalism literally created the human body as we have it today, as we utilize it today. But I think what they're saying is that it's kind of like those arguments, you know, how some people say we only use like 3% of our brain or whatever. So what if there's this whole other aspect of our body that we can't even begin to explore because capitalism has so captured our body? That's the argument that they're making. I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm saying that this is the argument that they're making, that that the human body is so captured by capitalism, like literally created by capitalism. We have all these other things that we could do, all these other spiritual things that we could do, that are separate from the capitalist created human body, that we can't even begin to explore because we're so, yes, Bot says capitalism colonized our souls. Yeah, that is actually, you remember when I made that Marxism is coming for your soul t-shirt for Halloween as a joke? They're literally arguing that in real life.
If the human body and not the steam engine, and not even the clock, was the first machine developed by capitalism, then what is remains of all the capacities of the body which cannot be efficiently put to use or rationalized by this technological innovation? The imposition of a Cartesian master-slave dynamic between the mind-body also means the generalization of that dynamic toward all of the forms and capacities of life which once enchanted the body's sensual connection to the wild world. Our being was inscribed into a soulless world and a machine body. Francis Bacon lamented that magic kills industry.
Before capitalism, we were off in the woods, flitting about, and after capitalism, we were relegated to a machine body. Is that what it just said? Okay. The imposition of a Cartesian master-slave dynamic, that means oppressor versus oppressed, between the mind-body also means a generalization of that dynamic towards all forms and capacities of life, which once enchanted the body's sensual connection to the wild world. Okay, so so before capitalism, the body had a sensual connection to the wild world. We were more tuned into all of our different senses. After capitalism, our being was inscribed into a soulless world and a machine body. This is real. This is not fiction. This is real. They really believe this.
Francis Bacon lamented that magic kills industry. And this is precisely because the continued relation of human beings to their magical capacities was also their capacity to find meaning and sustenance outside of the world of work and industry. Magical and spiritual beliefs were dangerous simply because their refusal of linear, empty time itself was a source of insubordination. In order for Leviathan to achieve its restructuring of the body, it had to first divorce the body of it. Participation in a cosmology of power and spirit. The perceived wildness of the witches had to be crushed alongside the wildness of the world. Leviathan alone would possess the ability to alter, enchant and deploy the body. This control over the body certainly happens in a largely metaphysical operation, yet it obscures itself and pretends toward the natural and objective. Perhaps the most sinister aspect of the spiritual decimation which mechanizes the body is that it denies the existence of spirit at all. The mechanization of the body is so constitutive of the individual that, at least in industrialized countries, giving space to the belief in occult forces does not jeopardize the regularity of social behavior. Astrology, too, can be allowed to...
All right. RJ says, forgive me for asking this because I know we hate it whenever James Lindsay talks about Gnosticism, but isn't it saying the human body is literally, is bad, literally Gnosticism? Well, one could make that argument, but what you're missing here, and it might be willful missing because you're trying to be smart, is that they are literally saying that because the body is oppressed by capitalism. The entire argument, and you just got here, which is why we should listen more than we speak, which is a recommendation I've given you before. The entire text that we have been listening to for hours now is saying that this is the imposition of capitalism on the body. That is what they are saying caused it. So is this James Lindsay's Gnosticism argument? No, it's not the Gnosticism argument at all in any way, because his argument is way different than capitalism enforced gender on the body. That's the argument that's being made. So this is why you can't become confused with the flowery language. This is why you need to listen to understand the fundamentals of what is going on. And this is why we listen before we talk when we show up to a stream almost 2 hours late.
Astrology, too, can be allowed to return, with the certainty that even the most devoted consumer of astral charts will automatically consult the watch before going to work. This mechanization was achieved through the twofold operation of denying the spiritual existence while also destroying the rebel body. Hobbes, as for witches,
This is not a mention of Gnosticism. Bellium says they barely even they're not even mentioning Gnosticism. Guys, oh my God, how many times do I have to pause the video and emphasize that their argument is the imposition of capitalism on the body? This is not a Gnostic argument. It is an argument against capitalism. Does everyone understand this? I need people to say they understand this in the chat if they understand this. If you do not understand this, I need you to ask a question, because I'm quite frankly really alarmed at people saying, this is just, one example. No, it's not an example of Gnosticism at all. I have paused like 15 times in the reading of this to explain explicitly and to point out all the instances in which they're saying this is capitalism imposed on the body. Bellium, arguing with me on this is not going to be your best strategy. I promise you. Thank you.
Hobbes, as for witches, I think not that their witchcraft is any real power, but yet they are justly punished, for the false belief they have that they can do such mischief, joined with their purpose to do it if they can. Freddie Perlman and Arthur Evans will both criticize historians of the witch hunt for reiterating this same domesticated analyses, justifying the massacres of the witch hunts by projecting the mechanistic understanding of the body through time and into the natural world. The stakes on which witches and other practitioners of magic died, and the chambers in which their tortures were executed, were a laboratory in which much social discipline was sedimented, and much knowledge about the body was gained. Here those irrationalities were eliminated that stood in the way of the transformation of the individual and social body into a set of predictable and controllable mechanisms. And it was here again that the scientific use of torture was born. This battle, significantly occurring at the foot of the gallows, demonstrates both the violence that presided over the scientific rationalization of the world, and the clash of two opposite concepts of the body, two opposite investments in it. On one side, we have a concept of the body that sees it endowed with powers even after death. The corpse does not inspire repulsion, and is not treated as something rotten or irreducibly alien. On the other, the body is seen as dead even when still alive, insofar as it is conceived as a mechanical device, to be taken apart just like any machine. The course of scientific rationalization was intimately connected to the attempt by the state to impose its control over an unwilling workforce. Farrell Fawn put things another way in The Quest for the Spiritual.
Wait, what did that just say? On the other hand, the body is seen as dead, even when still alive, insofar as it is conceived as a mechanical device. Capitalism conceives the body as a mechanical device to be taken apart just like any other machine. They're literally saying that capitalism makes people like cogs in a machine. They're saying it mechanizes not only like your mind, but your entire body as being a cog in the machine. And then it says, the course of scientific rationalization was ultimately connected to the attempt by the state, the capitalist state, to impose its control over an unwilling workforce. So the capitalist state had to mechanize the body, literally create people that are cogs in a machine. This is what the assembly line is. It's an attempt to exert control over an unwilling workforce by making them just another machine in the factory.
Farrell Fawn put things another way in The Quest for the Spiritual. This civilized, technological, commodity culture in which we live is a wasteland. For most people, most of the time, life is dull and empty, lacking vibrancy, adventure, passion, and ecstasy.
So true.
It's no surprise that many people search beyond the realm of their normal daily existence for something more. It is in this light that we need to understand the quest for the spiritual. I discovered that this dualism was common to all religions with the possible exceptions of some forms of Taoism and Buddhism. I also discovered something quite insidious about the flesh-spirit dichotomy. Religion proclaims the realm of spirit to be the realm of freedom, of creativity, of beauty, of ecstasy, of joy, of wonder, of life itself. In contrast, the realm of matter is the realm of dead mechanical activity, of grossness, of work, of slavery, of suffering, of sorrow. The earth, the creatures on it, even our own bodies were impediments to our spiritual growth, or at best, tools to be exploited. What a perfect ideological justification for the exploitative activities of civilization. As exploitation immiserated the lives of people, the ecstatic joy of wild existence and of the flesh unrepressed became fainter and fainter memories until at last they seemed to be not of this world at all. This world was the world of travail and sorrow. Joy and ecstasy had to be of another realm, the realm of spirit. Early religion is wildly orgiastic, clearly reflecting the lost way of life for which people long.
Early religion is wildly orgiastic, clearly reflecting the lost way of life that capitalism stole from us when it domesticated all of society. We could have had these wildly orgiastic religions just like they have in Brave New World, where everyone belongs to everyone else and you're fucking a different person every single day of the week and you're taking your soma in between. This is what capitalism stole from us.
But by separating this wild abandon into the realm of spirit, which is in reality just a realm of abstract ideas with no concrete existence, religion made itself the handmaiden of civilized, domesticated culture.
Religion,
This transformation of the body.
hang on. Religion made itself the handmaiden of capitalist domesticated culture. Because religion took away our wildly orgiastic way of life. So, I mean, if you want to talk about why queer people might hate Christians, they don't, by the way. They don't actually hate Christians. They just think that Christianity is going to go away once capitalism is abolished. But if you're reading this in the way that it is intended to be read, what you should be reading is, before capitalism, we could do all this crazy sexual stuff and we were in touch with our innate selves and who we really are. And then capitalism came in and they took it all away from us and we had to fit ourselves into this little box of acceptable behavior. That's Christianity, is what they're saying. This is what religion was for, to force us into this little box of acceptable behavior. And once we abolish capitalism, we will be freed from that little box. So it's not necessarily that they hate Christians. They actually don't. They really don't actually care all that much. But what they're saying is that religion was like enforcing people to follow the moral bounds of capitalism, whereas our spirit, our soul, wants to go beyond that. And once we free ourselves of capitalism, free ourselves of civilized domestication, then we will be able to be in touch with who we truly are, and then we're going to have a lot of sex and that sort of thing.
This transformation of the body into predictable and controllable operations is absolutely central to the naturalization of the category of sex. The uterus becomes a machine, controlled by the state and doctors, for the production of new bodies.
Okay, so this is another example of what if women want to have children? Isn't it okay for women to have children? Well, they believe the uterus is a machine controlled by the capitalist state and capitalist doctors for the production of new bodies.
The incomprehensible diversity of the human body becomes reduced to a simplistic and quantitative relation between various chemicals and hormones. Certain shapes are deemed healthy while others abnormal and in need of surgical intervention. The binary of the so-called sex organs is almost achieved through this ongoing mutilation.
Oh.
Certain ratios of the distribution of fat, hair, bone structure and other occurrences come to be immutable proof of the eternal existence of the social prison of sex.
Okay, so now we're getting into a place where we're going to start getting into disability justice. We're going to start getting into fat studies. Both disability justice and fat studies are like subsets of queer ideology. So they're saying capitalism says you can only have certain types of bodies. Capitalism says that your bodies have to work in a certain way. Otherwise, you have to be fixed in some way by the capitalist doctors. This is where we get into this weird, all like the really crazy shit.
In order for this prison to be totalizing, our conception of ourselves must be debased to these material operations. The engendering of humanity into the rational sexual body required the destruction of magic precisely because a magical view of the world holds that it is animated, unpredictable, and that there is an occult force in plants, animals, stones, the stars, and ourselves. Within this animist worldview, our individual capacities are not limited to the supposed biological destiny of sex. Instead, we can create, destroy, love, and take pleasure in an infinity of situations. This anarchic, molecular diffusion of powers throughout the world is antithetical to a gendered and social order which aims at capturing and dominating all life.
See?
The world had to be disenchanted to be dominated.
Oh.
Here is science born. The disenchanted world can now be explained through rational, objective inquiry.
Oh my God. We had to become disenchanted from our natural innate selves in order to be domesticated. And this is where science comes in. Because science is going to reinforce the rational, the objective, the ordered world that capitalism is seeking to create.
The disenchanted world can now be explained through rational, objective inquiry. And yet it is a meaningful contradiction that this new science did not mean an end to what it would have seen as an irrational persecution of witches. Instead, mechanistic philosophers celebrated the witch hunts as the advancement of the rational worldview. Francis Bacon, one of the early high priests of science, is explicit in taking methods of scientific inquiry directly out.
A high priest of science. So now science is literally the priesthood, and remember, the priesthood is going to be a function of capitalism because they believe that religion is imposing this stuff on us.
Francis Bacon, one of the early high priests of science, is explicit in taking methods of scientific inquiry directly out of torture chambers of the Inquisition. For science, the whole world becomes analogous to a witch, a body to be interrogated, tortured, raped, and unveiled.
Oh my God!
Far from relegated to this.
Oh, and now they're going to say that, okay, science is capitalism, and capitalism is literally Nazis, is what they're about to say. I just love this, though. For science, the whole world becomes analogous to a witch, a body to be interrogated, tortured, raped, and unveiled. See, I keep telling you guys, we may have to sit through some nonsense with these papers, and there's some, they get a little wordy sometimes, but once you hit, like, the really crazy sections, you will never see anything like what is in these dystopian writings anywhere. And this is all real. This is not fiction. This is not Orwell. This is not something that's taught in a science fiction class. This is not a movie. They actually do believe this in real life. I know I keep saying that, but people don't believe me when I try to tell them this. And it's like, no, this is real. This is what queer anarchists read when they're just like hanging out in bookstores and stuff. This stuff is taught in colleges. I'm not joking about that. This is what they read in colleges and queer studies and shit like that. This is why the world is insane.
Far from relegated to this particular period, we can see repeating over and over again in Nazi death camps, the medical experimentation on prisoners, the vivisection of animals, etc. Scientific rationalism is not some progressive intervention against brutality, it is simply the universalization of that brutality against all the wild world, against the body and against the spirit. This scientific approach to the world becomes all the more terrifying when it is taken up by revolutionaries. The bourgeois revolutions fought in the name of reason and justice, ended up carving those abstractions into the flesh of individuals through the guillotine.
The bourgeois revolutions. Bourgeois means, of course, capitalist. Bourgeois versus proletariat. The bourgeois revolutions fought in the name of reason and justice, ended up carving these abstractions into the flesh of individuals through the guillotine, committees of public safety and health, and other implements of systemic terror.
The bourgeois revolutions fought in the name of reason and justice, ended up carving those abstractions into the flesh of individuals through the guillotine, committees of public safety and health, and other implements of systemic terror. This terror took on a new dimension in the communist revolutions which followed. We'll have to say, along with the editors of Green Anarchy, that the scientific understanding of the world is the culmination of the segmentation of reality which first occurs in gender and in domestication. Science is not neutral. It is loaded with motives and assumptions that come out of and reinforce the catastrophe of dissociation, disempowerment, and consuming deadness that we call civilization. Science assumes detachment. This is built into the very word observation.
They're literally saying that science is capital. I cannot even believe this paper. This is insane.
To observe something is to perceive it while distancing oneself emotionally and physically, to have a one-way channel of information moving from the observed thing to the self, which is defined as not a part of that thing. This death-based or mechanistic view is a religion, the dominant religion of our time. The method of science deals only with the quantitative. It does not admit values or emotions, or the way the air smells when it's starting to rain, or if it deals with these things, it does so by transforming them into numbers, by turning oneness with the smell of the rain into abstract preoccupation with the chemical formula for ozone, turning the way it makes you feel into the intellectual idea that emotions are only an illusion of firing neurons. Number itself is not truth but a chosen style of thinking. We have chosen a habit of mind that focuses our attention into a world removed from reality, where nothing has quality or awareness or a life of its own. We have chosen to transform the living into the dead. Careful thinking scientists will admit that what they study is a narrow simulation of the complex real world, but few of them notice that this narrow focus is self-feeding, that it has built technological, economic, and political systems that are all working together, which suck our reality in on itself. As narrow as the world of numbers is, scientific method does not even permit all numbers. Only those numbers which are reproducible, predictable, and the same for all observers.
Oh my God.
Of course, reality itself is not reproducible or predictable or the same for all observers.
Okay. So we've talked about how they believe capitalism created the gender binary. The gender binary means men and women. They do not believe that men and women are biological. They believe that men and women are social constructs that were created by this cultural system called capitalism. You might think the argument against that would be, well, this is biology and some people have penises and some people have vaginas and that's just the way it goes. But then they would say to you, as narrow as the world of numbers is, scientific method does not even permit all numbers. Only those numbers which are reproducible, predictable, and the same for all observers. Let me translate this back to gender. As narrow as the world of gender is, scientific method does not even permit all genders. Only the genders which are reproducible, predictable, and the same for all observers. Do you guys get it? There's no binary. The norm does not include the abnormal. The queer is the abnormal that does not adhere to the norm. They're saying science is binary and science tries to eliminate anything that is not reproducible, predictable, and the same for all observers. But what about intersex people, guys? Intersex people are not normal or reproducible or predictable. They pop up every once in a while. This is the argument being made. Does everyone understand this?
As narrow as the world of numbers is, scientific method does not even permit all numbers. Only those numbers which are reproducible, predictable, and the same for all observers. Of course, reality itself is not reproducible or predictable or the same for all observers. But neither are fantasy worlds derived from reality. Science doesn't stop at pulling us into a dream world. It goes one step further and makes this dream world a nightmare whose contents are selected for predictability and controllability and uniformity.
Why not?
All surprise and sensuality are vanquished. Because
they're literally saying that science eliminates anything that is not predictable or controllable or uniform. Science eliminates all surprise. It eliminates these anomalies. It keeps us in the box that capitalism has created for us.
all surprise and sensuality are vanquished. Because of science, states of consciousness that cannot be reliably disposed are classified as insane, or at best non-ordinary, and excluded. Anomalous experience, anomalous ideas, and anomalous people are cast off or destroyed like imperfectly shaped machine components. Science is only a manifestation and locking in of an urge for control that we've had at least since we started farming fields and fencing animals instead of surfing the less predictable world of reality, or nature. And from that time to now, this urge has driven every decision about what counts as progress, up to and including the genetic restructuring of life. 14. A critique of science now poses a tremendous problem for most theories of resistance. So many of the old means of resistance have only reaffirmed this ordering of the world. The blind spot of this resistance is specifically that we ourselves have been domesticated in a biological dimension, in the capture of our bodies and the denial of our spirit. It wouldn't be enough to destroy all the computer infrastructure in the world, so long as we hold an unspoken view of ourselves as primitive computers. Any attempts to deploy science in the pursuit of liberation can only deepen the tragedy of separation and control, which is the very essence of domestication. This can perhaps be more easily realized in Marxism than in any other system of thought in the last century. Freddie Perlman's text.
Hey, mass genocide just got here. Hey, mass genocide, we're learning that science is literally capitalism right now. Welcome.
Freddie Perlman's text The Continuing Appeal of Nationalism is brutal on this point. Marx had a significant blind spot. Most of his disciples, and many militants who were not his—
Another critique of Marx. This is like the third critique of Marx in this episode. Not even in the entire document, just in this episode.
Marx had a significant blind spot. Most of his disciples, and many militants who were not his disciples, built their platforms on that blind spot. Marx was an enthusiastic supporter of the bourgeoisie's struggle for liberation from feudal bonds, who was not an enthusiast in those days. He, who observed that the ruling ideas of an epoch were the ideas of the ruling class, shared many of the ideas of the newly empowered middle class. He was an enthusiast of the Enlightenment, of rationalism, of material progress.
The critique of Marx that they're offering is Marx was just too rational. He embraced science, and science is literally capitalism. Why would Marx do this to us? Oh my gosh.
It was Marx who insightfully pointed out that every time a worker reproduced his labor power, ever minute he devoted to his assigned task, he enlarged the material and social apparatus that dehumanized him. Yet the same Marx was an enthusiast for the application of science to production.
There it is.
But this progress—
Yet Marx was an enthusiast for the application of science to production. They're literally chiding Marx for embracing science. I love this.
But this progress had to contend, at every juncture, with the decomposition which accompanied all leviathanic organization. In order to do this, Leviathan has consistently needed new populations from which it could squeeze surplus. At times, the captured domestication of these populations was achieved through colonialism, whereas at others it was to be found in domestic colonies. This process of primitive accumulation is responsible for the takeoffs, the windfalls, and the great leaps forward. New injections of preliminary capital are the only known cure to the crises. Without an ongoing primitive accumulation of capital, the production process would stop. Each crisis would tend to become permanent. Genocide, the rationally calculated extermination of human populations designated as legitimate prey, has not been an aberration in an otherwise peaceful march of progress. This is why national armed forces were indispensable to the wielders of capital. These forces did not only protect the owners of capital from the insurrectionary wrath—
Hang on. Maria says, this is really making some of their contradictions make sense to me. Maria, they're not contradictions. So this is what people really need to understand. Just because something might seem like a contradiction to you does not mean it's a contradiction. If you think that something that a Marxist or a queer activist is saying is a contradiction, that just means you are not understanding the argument that they're making, because these people are incredibly consistent. They are consistent across everything. If you understand that capitalism is at the core of every single argument, without exception, there is no exception to this at all. This is where people get confused. They say capitalism couldn't possibly be everything. No, it is. It is. They say it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. If you understand that, then you will never be confused. There are no contradictions. Well, yeah, I understand that you're saying that you thought they were contradictions, but this is why I'm pointing this out specifically, because you've been watching my content for a long time. You should have known this. So if you think there's a contradiction, what you need to do, and this is for everyone, this is not just for Maria, if you think, golly, that seems like a contradiction, no, you need to stop yourself and you need to say, I know that this is not a contradiction because these people are incredibly consistent and it always comes back to capitalism. And so how does this relate to capitalism? And once you answer that question, you are going to realize there was never any contradiction at all. You just didn't understand because you weren't thinking about it in the way that they think about it. Is he saying that Marx considered his theory scientific socialism, that Marx's blind spot was accepting a principle that was too bourgeois? No, Kyle, that's not what they're saying. What they're saying is that science only likes things that are replicable and repeatable and predictable, so it literally eliminates things that are not those things, and Marx embraced too much science, so he was actually embracing a capitalistic philosophy when he embraced science.
These forces did not only protect the owners of capital from the insurrectionary...
Fellium, this is a great way to put it. Capitalism is the contradiction to them. Communism has no contradictions. Communism is very simple. No one owns anything that can allow them to create privatized wealth. Therefore, no one ever has more resources than other people because everyone always has access to the same resources. There is no private ownership. If you always come back to that, and you always realize that this always has to do with the imposition of private ownership, whether that be over a home or over your body or over your family or any of the other things, then you will realize there are no contradictions in their philosophy. They have thought this stuff through. They have vetted this. They know how to explain it. They've been doing this for 100 years. By the way, conservatives don't do this, which is why they don't even think about it in this way. This is something that they do.
These forces did not only protect the owners of capital from the insurrectionary wrath of their own exploited wage workers. These forces also captured the Holy Grail, the magic lantern, the preliminary capital, by battering the gates of resisting or unresisting outsiders, by looting, deporting, and murdering. Human communities as variegated in their ways and beliefs as birds are in feathers were invaded, despoiled, and at last exterminated beyond imagination's grasp. The clothes and artifacts of the vanished communities were gathered up as trophies, and displayed in museums as additional traces of the march of progress. The extinct beliefs and ways became the curiosities of yet another of the invaders' many sciences. The expropriated fields, forests, and animals were garnered as bonanzas, as preliminary capital, as the precondition for the production process that was to turn the fields into farms, the trees into lumber, the animals into hats, the minerals into munitions, the human survivors into cheap labor. Genocide was, and still is, the precondition, the cornerstone and groundwork of the military-industrial complexes, of the processed environments of the world of offices and parking lots. Perlman goes on to follow this blind spot, the capture, genocide, and exploitation necessitated by industrialization, through the thought of the vast majority of revolutionaries since Marx, anarchists, socialists, and Leninists alike. All of them glorify industrialism as key within the progressive movement of history. For Freddy, the most innovative and horrifying consequence of this blind spot can be seen in the Bolshevik Revolution and the thought of Lenin.
Oh, here we go.
Lenin was a Russian bourgeois who cursed the weakness and ineptitude of the Russian bourgeoisie. An enthusiast for capitalist development, an ardent admirer of American-style progress, he did not make common cause with those he cursed, but rather with their enemies, with the anti-capitalist disciples of Marx. He availed himself of Marx's blind spot to transform Marx's critique of the capitalist production process into a manual for developing capital, a how-to-do-it guide. Marx's studies of exploitation and immiseration became food for the famished, a cornucopia, a virtual horn of plenty. Russian countryfolk could not be mobilized in terms of their Russianness or orthodoxy or whiteness, but they could be, and were, mobilized in terms of their exploitation, their oppression, their ages of suffering under the despotism of the Tsars. Oppression and exploitation became welding materials. The long sufferings under the Tsars were used to organize people into fighting units, into embryos of the national army and the national police. Lenin did not live long enough to demonstrate his virtuosity as general manager of Russian capital, but his successor Stalin amply demonstrated the powers of the founder's machine. The first step was the primitive accumulation of capital. If Marx had not been very clear about this, Preobrazhensky had been very clear. Preobrazhensky was jailed, but his description of the tried and tested methods of procuring preliminary capital was applied to vast Russia. The preliminary capital of English, American, Belgian and other capitalists had come from plundered overseas colonies. Russia had no overseas colonies. This lack was no obstacle. The entire Russian countryside was transformed into a colony. The peasants were not the only colonials. The former ruling class.
Okay. So, they're saying that Stalin, remember, these people do not like Stalin. They believe that Stalin ruined everything. They believe that Stalin very literally turned the entire Russian countryside into a colony.
The peasants were not the only colonials. The former ruling class had already been thoroughly expropriated of all its wealth and property, but yet other sources of preliminary capital were found. With the totality of state power concentrated in their hands, the dictators soon discovered that they could manufacture sources of primitive accumulation. Successful entrepreneurs, dissatisfied workers and peasants, militants of competing organizations, even disillusioned party members, could be designated as counter-revolutionaries, rounded up, expropriated and shipped off to labor camp. All the deportations, mass executions and expropriations of earlier colonizers were reenacted in Russia. By time, all the methods of procuring preliminary capital had been tried and tested, and could be scientifically applied. Perlman will.
They're about to compare Hitler and Mao. I read ahead there. Look at this. Hitler, Mussolini, and Mao. Remember, guys, Marxists in the United States, I shouldn't say Marxists. Queer activists do not like Mao. Every single time you hear someone like James Lindsay say, "We are Maoism with American characteristics," that is not correct at all, in any way. These people do not like Mao. They do not like Stalin. Mao is in the footprint of Stalin. They like They like Marxist Leninism. That is what their thing is. And so check this out. They're literally about to compare Hitler with Mao.
Perlman will contend that this innovative method of capture will later inspire the likes of Hitler, Mussolini and Mao, most of whom will dispense of the rhetoric of the Bolsheviks, but maintain the boiled-down scientific essentials of the method. And since the revolution which first implemented this method failed in its rhetorical aim of liberating humanity from wage labor, this too was dispensed of as an embarrassment. Instead, the progress of the techno-industrial state is itself the justification. The primitive accumulation needed for the ascendance of later totalitarian states would be found in the internal enemies of the parties. Domestication no longer needs to justify itself through anything other than its own scientific method. And science itself would invent methods that earlier genocidal colonialists could only have dreamed of: eugenics, gas chambers, laboratories.
They're saying capitalism literally did the Holocaust. Domestication means capitalism. Domestication no longer needs to justify itself through anything other than its own scientific method, also a reference to capitalism. And science itself would invent methods that earlier genocidal colonists could only have dreamed of, like eugenics, gas chambers, and laboratories. They're literally saying that capitalism caused the Holocaust.
These industrializers will each imagine a triumphant reduction of the entire Eurasian continent to a site of resources to be domesticated and accumulated. Western rationalists will attempt to explain these mass murderers as irrational, and yet would see people like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson as perfectly reasonable leaders, even though these men envisioned and began to enact the conquest of a vast continent, the deportation and extermination of the continent's population, at a time when such a project was much less feasible. What is consistent in all of these situations is a deeply seated belief in human progress through the expansion of industrial civilization. Modern-day Marxists will say that these applications of Marx's theory were incorrect and that they were deviant or revisionist.
Oh.
But isn't this horror the consequence of every attempt to impose any theory on a mass industrial scale? Applied scientists used the discovery to split the atom's nucleus, to produce weapons which can split every atom's nucleus. Nationalists used the poetry to split and fuse human populations, to mobilize genocidal armies, to perpetuate new holocausts.
There it
the
is.
Pure scientists,
there it is.
poets, and researchers.
They literally just said they're going to perpetuate a new Holocaust. The scientists are going to perpetuate a new Holocaust.
Applied scientists used the discovery to split the atom's nucleus, to produce weapons which can split every atom's nucleus. Nationalists used the poetry to split and fuse human populations, to mobilize genocidal armies, to perpetuate new holocausts. The pure scientists, poets, and researchers consider themselves.
T-Bone Man, you have got to stop doing this. What is going on? This is a bullshit conservative take right here. We will beat this out of you on this channel. Stop bringing bullshit conservative takes to my chat. The reason is you're only hurting yourself. What T-Bone Man says is, the rational side of my brain feels like it's on a psychotic break. No. No, that is not what's happening. What is happening is you are going through a process of cognitive dissonance. You are being exposed to information that you previously had not been exposed to, and your brain is processing that information, and you don't want to believe that this is true. You're calling it a psychotic break because you go with a crowd of people that is very used to calling these people insane. They're literally insane. They're all mentally ill. Blah, 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 blah. The problem when you do that is you dismiss what they're actually doing. Because it's really easy to dismiss people who are mentally ill. It's really easy to dismiss ideas when you believe that this is some form of psychotic break or mental illness. These people are not mentally ill. These people are, quite frankly, winning. They have taken over our schools. Donald Trump's executive order is not going to stop them. They are going to continue this cultural crusade of eliminating all gender. Mentally ill people don't do that. These people have fundamentally different values than you do. These people have a fundamentally different way of seeing the world as you do. And no one is going to be there to remind you of that when you're processing this information if you don't do it yourself. I promise you, the very worst thing that you can say to yourself is, this is literally mental illness. They are insane. I'm going through a psychotic break. No, you're not. What you're doing is you're processing information that you didn't have access to before. That's what's happening. That is what you need to tell yourself. The goal here is to look at this from a detached perspective, not in a bullshit outrage clickbait. Oh my God, I need to share this on Twitter right now and lives of TikTok and blah, 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 blah. That's not what we're doing. We are learning their philosophy in the way that they understand it.
The pure scientists, poets, and researchers consider themselves innocent of the devastated countrysides and charred bodies. Every minute devoted to the capitalist production process, every thought contributed to the industrial system, further enlarges a power that is inimical to nature, to culture, to life. Applied science is not something alien. It is an integral part of the capitalist production process.
Oh, is
What
it?
becomes clear is that any attempt to flesh out a scientific theory of domination becomes put to work by domination itself as a blueprint. This could be understood as
Hang on. You're not causing pauses and interruptions, but I need to know that you're we're giving you feedback to help you, okay? You don't need to apologize every single time. Just take in the information and use it.
This could be understood as the decomposition of history. More significantly, it ties into the critique articulated above of other scientific disciplines, anthropology and psychoanalysis. The pure theories of anthropologists, psychoanalysts and Marxists always tend to become new means of domestication, universities, asylums and work camps. Kamat is at his most lucid when critiquing the role of theory. Theory, like consciousness, demands objectification to such an extent that even an individual who rejects political rackets can elevate theory to the status of a racket. In a subject posing as revolutionary, theory is a despotism. Everyone should recognize this. After the domination of the body by the mind for more than 2 millennia, it is obvious that theory is still a manifestation of this domination. For this reason, it is all the more important that we dispense with scientific certainty and methodology in our inquiry into gender. Otherwise, the solutions will continue to be more of the same. Cyberfeminism, the virtual flight from the body, automated reproduction, a flight which is illusory, a forgetting of the whole train and logic of oppressive institutions that make up patriarchy. The disembodied high-tech future can only be more of the same destructive course. In the same way that the mind-body split assures us that idealist solutions to gender will always fail, so too does the material-spiritual split guarantee us that the blind spot of industrialism will continue its course of annihilation and control. To return momentarily to feral fawn. Materialism still accepts the matter-spirit dichotomy, but then proclaims that spirit does not exist. Thus, freedom, creativity, beauty, ecstasy, life as something more than mere mechanical existence are utterly eradicated from the world. Mechanistic materialism is the ideology of religion updated to fit the needs of industrial capitalism. For industrial capitalism requires not only a deadened, dispirited earth, but deadened, dispirited human beings who can be made into cogs in a vast machine.
So that really sums it up there, doesn't it? For industrial capitalism requires not only a deadened, dispirited earth, so an earth in which people are separated from their true spiritual selves, but deadened, dispirited human beings who can be turned into cogs in a vast machine. And the vast machine, of course, is capitalism. All right, guys, we're gonna do the rest of this next time. We've got one more part of this left to go. We are ending at part 15, so we will be picking up there next time. It looks like we have about an hour and 20 minutes left to read in this publication. So this is a really long one. Thank you guys for hanging in there, but there's just so much good stuff in this. I didn't really see that we were going to get to science is capitalism and capitalism is science and witchcraft is queer and all this stuff today. It was really an enlightening episode. Hopefully the best is still yet to come. But we will be returning back to the gender nightmare next week. And if you want to catch up with that, please head over to my Substack. Again, that is, as always, carlin.substack.com. And you can go to the book club link. And if you have missed any of the previous episodes or you just wandered into this and you're like, what the fuck is even going on? You can catch up on past episodes of the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club. You can find it on the Substack. You can also find the podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can also listen to it through the Substack if you want. And you can find the documents that we're actually reading under this link, the dystopian documents queer and gender activists are reading. Just scroll down and you'll be able to find all of the PDFs and all of the links, and you'll be able to find the full reading list. We still have a lot of stuff to get through, and I've got even more to add to the reading list after that. So we will never run out of crazy documents to read in the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club. And if you feel like supporting the work I'm doing, you can sign up on the website for $8 a month, $80 a year. I am 100% funded by you guys. My ability to do podcasts like this and videos and streaming and stuff like that and walk everyone through this, breaking down what it means, helping people understand what's going on, that is 100% funded by you. So I don't have any big political donors. I am a grassroots funded operation, I suppose. And so $8 a month, $80 a year keeps me in business. I really appreciate it. If you guys want to see more of this content, please make sure you're supporting it, because that is when the content actually gets created. And as a reminder, you can pick up my new book. It is called A Brief History of Racism. You can find it on Amazon in paperback and Kindle. I'm not planning on doing an audio version right this second. That's not to say I won't do one in the future. People have been asking about this. I'm just not going to do it right this second because my last audiobook was traumatic for me, okay? But you do have the Kindle version. You do have the paperback. Maybe I'll do an audio version at some point. And as a reminder, I've got a surprise coming. I've got a really big surprise, and you guys are going to love it. And I'm going to announce it on Socialism Saturday. But if you would like to be the first to hear about the surprise, make sure you're on the email list of the Red Menace Collective. That is a separate Substack. That is redmenacecollective.substack.com. This is where I post information about my books, because the Red Menace Collective is what funds the writing of the books. This is separate again. This is $10 a month, $100 a year. You get access to a variety of perks, including draft chapters as I'm writing them, also including finished digital copies of the books when they're done. So if you remember the Red Menace Collective, you can actually download a PDF of A Brief History of Racism over on the website. And I will be announcing a little surprise on Saturday on the Red Menace Collective. And then we will be unveiling it to the world on Socialism Saturday. So if you want a first look at what the surprise is, make sure you're on the email list for that. And you can sign up for free. You don't have to pay to sign up or anything. But they will be the first ones that are notified of the surprise. And you guys are really going to like it. And it is going to fulfill all your debunking fantasies. You are going to get so much debunking. You will get sick of debunking. You're going to get so much debunking in the surprise that I'm going to announce on Saturday. All right, guys, that's all we have for tonight. I'll be back tomorrow at 5 p.m. I hope you all guys all have a good rest of the day. Take care, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital.
That's difficult to answer.